There are some stories that sneak up on you, not with explosions or drama, but with silence that cuts deeper than noise. Stories that happen not under the spotlight, but in the shadows. And this one begins in the quiet hours when the world has gone to sleep and no one is watching. It's about a man most people never see, a woman who thought she had it all figured out, and how a routine job in a cold office hallway became the beginning of something revolutionary. This isn't just a story about race or class or corporate glass walls. It's about what happens when someone finally sees you, not as your job title or your skin, but as you. And if you think it sounds like fiction, stay with me. Because in a world full of loud voices, the quietest people often carry the deepest truths. His name was Dante Carter. Most people didn't know that. They called him the cleaner or maintenance guy, or worse, didn't refer to him at all. Every night at exactly 10:07 p.m., he would clock in, pull out his key ring, and begin his silent journey through glass-walled offices and corporate silence. He wasn't just cleaning up trash and wiping down fingerprints. He was navigating a world that never truly let him in. Because being a black man in a white-collar environment after hours is more complicated than most people realize. You move differently. You speak carefully. You stay invisible on purpose because visibility can get you labeled, profiled, or even punished. Dante wasn't bitter. He was used to it. Invisible was safer than misunderstood. And anyway, he wasn't there for conversation. He had a daughter to feed, a mother to support, and no room for ego. He kept his head down and his earbuds in. Until one night something changed. Maya Williams was the type of woman people described with polished phrases: high-performing, visionary, relentless. She ran one of the fastest-growing design firms in the city. Her office was always spotless, her outfits precise, her calendar booked to the minute. Widowed at 37, she had turned grief into grit. Her success wasn't handed to her, it was clawed from the bones of burnout and survival. But success is a funny thing. It doesn't always mean happiness. And behind her corner office glass, Maya sat in silence long after everyone else left, staring at empty screens and full inboxes, wondering if this was what winning was supposed to feel like. It was during one of those late nights while the office hummed in a kind of sterile loneliness that their paths finally crossed. She was sitting on the floor in heels too expensive for carpets, nursing a cup of stale coffee, when she heard the familiar jingle of keys. She looked up, and there he was, Dante, pushing his card-eyes lowered body, moving with the kind of practiced awareness that said, "I'll be gone before you even remember I was here." But Maya did something unusual. She spoke. "You ever wonder why the lights in this place never feel warm?" Dante paused, unsure if she was talking to him or just thinking out loud. He gave a polite smile, the kind people like him are trained to give in corporate spaces, and kept moving. But she kept talking. "I sit here sometimes and think, maybe these offices were built for performance, not people." Now that made him stop. He looked at her, really looked. And what he saw wasn't a CEO or a boss. It was a woman unraveling quietly under fluorescent lights. So he nodded once and replied, "Performance pays more." That was it. 2 sentences, but it changed everything. Let's unpack that moment. Because what happened wasn't romance. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was recognition. 2 people, both exhausted in different ways, found something honest in a space where everything was usually filtered. For Maya, it was the first time someone had spoken truth to her without agenda. For Dante, it was the first time someone had seen him not as a job or a shadow, but as a human being. They began to talk more after that, slowly. At first it was casual, comments about the weather, complaints about the coffee. But soon it deepened. Maya shared stories about her late husband, how she hated the way people tiptoed around his name, as if grief had an expiration date. Dante spoke about growing up in a neighborhood where ambition was treated like betrayal, how he learned to shrink himself to avoid becoming a threat, how silence wasn't just survival, it was safety. These weren't ordinary conversations. They were excavations of identity, of grief, of what it means to be invisible in places built to celebrate only a few. Now let's bring this into real life. A 2021 study by McKinsey found that Black employees are significantly more likely to feel excluded in corporate environments and are underrepresented in leadership roles across nearly every industry. And yet countless Black workers hold companies together quietly from cleaning to IT to customer service without ever being truly acknowledged. Visibility, when granted, often comes with strings attached. Tokenism, stereotyping, conditional praise. And when someone like Dante exists in that system, his silence is not apathy, it's armor. Maya, on the other hand, represented another kind of invisible struggle. The strong, successful woman who everyone assumes has it all together. But behind every confident smile can be a private breakdown. Women like her often navigate male-dominated industries while carrying the burden of appearing unshakable. And grief. There's no place for it on a corporate calendar. So what happens when two invisible people finally see each other? They begin to heal. There's something sacred about spaces no one watches. In the daytime, offices are curated like theater stages. Every email, a performance, every handshake, a subtle transaction. But after dark, when the screens go black and the glass reflects only empty chairs, truth becomes easier to find. That's when Maya and Dante began talking, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of softness that only exists between people who have nothing to prove and nothing left to hide. They didn't plan it. They didn't schedule it. It just became a rhythm. Her tea, his mop, the buzz of a city that kept moving even when they stood still. They spoke of grief, but not like it was a wound, more like it was a weather system that came and went. Maya talked about how everyone wanted her to move on, as if love expired with death. How people stopped saying her husband's name after 6 months, assuming silence was kindness. Dante nodded. He knew grief too, not from death but from absence. A father who left when he was 8, friends who disappeared into prison or addiction, a community that got smaller every year without anyone saying goodbye. One night Maya asked, "Do you ever feel like the world only values your silence?" Dante looked up from his bucket. "Only when I'm being paid." That sentence lingered in the air like smoke. Because here's the truth that rarely gets acknowledged for many people, especially Black men in service roles. Being seen too much is dangerous. It leads to suspicion, surveillance, misunderstanding. And for Black women in power, being emotional is dangerous. It leads to being called unstable, unprofessional, or too much. So both Dante and Maya had learned in their own ways to be quiet to survive. But in these late-night talks, they were reclaiming their voices, not loudly, but honestly. Let's connect this to a real-world example. In 2020, an Amazon warehouse worker named Christian Smalls led a walkout over unsafe COVID conditions. Instead of being heard, he was labeled not articulate by company executives. His silence had once made him acceptable. His voice made him dangerous. That's the same system Dante moved through, one that wanted his labor, but not his presence. Maya understood that in a different way. As a CEO, she was always one misstep away from being discredited. She once cried during a board meeting and was immediately asked if she needed a break or if she was overwhelmed. Her male colleagues could shout, throw things, storm out, and be called passionate, but her tears were a liability. So what did they do with this shared frustration? They didn't rage. They reflected. They imagined what it might look like to live in a world where they didn't have to shrink. That's how the idea of the studio was born. It started with a joke. Dante mentioned how good he was with his hands, fixing cabinets, rewiring light switches, painting walls. Maya, half laughing, said, "And I can draw a perfect blueprint but can't change a light bulb." They laughed, but the seed was planted. What if they opened a space, not an office, not a business, but a studio? A place where people could come for small repairs and big conversations, where art and tools shared the same table, where race and class weren't barriers, but the very reasons the place needed to exist. They called it Williams and Carter Studio. Maya provided the seed funding. Dante brought the tools. Together they leased an old warehouse on the edge of the city, far from glass buildings and boardrooms. The neighborhood was rough around the edges, but rich in community. People didn't walk past each other there. They nodded, spoke, helped carry groceries. In the studio, they hung mismatched chairs, strung lights across the ceiling, painted the walls in warm colors. Kids came in after school to learn how to fix lamps or use power drills. Teenagers learned to sketch murals. Elders brought broken appliances, stayed for tea. It became more than a project. It became a movement. And that's when the attention started. At first, it was positive. Local blogs wrote glowing features. Community leaders stopped by, but soon whispers followed. How could a CEO be running a nonprofit in the hood? Why was she spending so much time with a janitor? Was it charity or something more scandalous? Then the photo happened. One evening, a volunteer snapped a picture. It showed Maya and Dante sitting on the floor of the studio, laughing, paint on their faces, holding mugs of tea. Innocent, joyful, human. But someone shared it online with a caption that wasn't. Is this the new standard for leadership? Within hours, it spread across corporate Slack channels, LinkedIn comments, even boardroom emails. Not the photo, just the assumption that Maya, a white CEO, was having an inappropriate relationship with a black employee, that her credibility was in question, that boundaries were being crossed. HR summoned her within 48 hours. We're concerned, they said. Optics matter. Maya didn't flinch. What do optics have to do with truth? They danced around words like reputation and conflict of interest, but the message was clear. Stay in your lane. Don't get too personal, especially not with someone like him. And that's when Maya realized this wasn't about professionalism. It was about power, about proximity, about how quickly systems collapse when you challenge the hierarchy of who's allowed to be where. She left the meeting, walked into her office, and didn't cry. She emailed her resignation letter, not because she was ashamed, but because she refused to operate in a world where compassion needed to be hidden. Dante met her at the studio that night. She didn't tell him everything. She didn't have to. He saw it in her posture, in her eyes. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Better than I've ever been. And for the first time since her husband died, Maya exhaled fully. Not because her life was perfect, but because it was finally honest. Freedom has a price, and it rarely comes with applause. The moment Maya stepped away from her CEO title, the world stopped clapping. Headlines that once praised her leadership genius now questioned her judgment. She was no longer the inspirational widow who rose from heartbreak. She was now the woman who walked away from everything. For a janitor. Because let's be honest, that's what society saw. Not a friendship, not a partnership, but a scandal. Why? Because Maya had dared to stand beside a man the world had decided belonged in the background. But while the corporate world whispered, the community embraced. Williams and Carter's studio blossomed. It became a haven, an after-school refuge, a mural hub, a repair workshop, a place where little boys learned to paint without being told they weren't supposed to be artists, a place where elderly women got their radios fixed while sipping ginger tea. It was magic built from scrap wood and shared pain, and it was dangerous to people who profited from silence. Enter Walter Crenshaw, a name as polished as the cufflinks he wore, a wealthy developer known for buying out entire neighborhoods and replacing corner stores with condo towers. Crenshaw had been eyeing the studio's block for months. It sat right on the edge of his next project, and he saw Maya and Dante's space as a threat not because of what it earned, but because of what it stood for. He offered to buy them out. The number was obscene, enough to start 10 new businesses. Dante laughed. Maya didn't even answer. Crenshaw smiled, then sent a second offer, twice the first. They still refused. Because here's the thing about people who have already lost everything: you can't buy them with fear. And that's when Crenshaw stopped being polite. It started with smear campaigns. Social media bots pushed false reviews. Articles appeared questioning the studio's tax status. Anonymous emails went to donors implying misuse of funds. Maya's personal life was dragged into the open. Photos twisted. Narratives manipulated. They even accused Dante of exploiting the community for personal gain, claiming he was pretending to be poor while allegedly hoarding funds. Lies, but believable ones in a world trained to distrust black men in positions of authority. Then came the worst night. Dante was walking home when police stopped him. No reason, no complaint, just a report of suspicious behavior. They asked about the tools in his bag, asked why he was out so late, asked who he really was. He showed ID, he explained the studio. It didn't matter. He was handcuffed on the sidewalk while neighbors filmed on their phones. It wasn't until a local activist arrived recognizing him that they let him go. No charges, no apology, just silence and a warning in their eyes. Let's stop here and face reality. According to data from the Washington Post, Black Americans are overrepresented in police stops, arrests, and use of force cases, even when unarmed and compliant. The cost of visibility for black men is often surveillance, suspicion, violence. Dante had gone from invisible to seen, and now the system was reacting. When Maya saw the bruises on his wrist, she didn't cry. She got angry. "This isn't just about us," she said. "They're afraid of what we represent." Dante nodded. "They should be." And so they went public. They held a press conference not with lawyers or branding teams, but with the community that built the studio. Kids stood behind them holding tools and paintbrushes. Seniors stood beside them holding signs. And Maya stepped to the mic with a voice that shook, not from fear, but from fire. "We are not just a studio. We are a statement. That art and repair and community are not luxuries, they're necessities. That healing spaces should not be bulldozed for profit. And that people like Dante Carter are not threats. They are teachers, mentors, protectors. You do not get to erase him, not now, not ever." Her speech went viral, not because it was slick, but because it was true. And suddenly the narrative changed. Local newspapers called it the protest on Pine Street. Activists rallied behind the studio. Donations poured in. A mural was painted across the building's front, a massive portrait of Maya and Dante back to back, surrounded by images of tools and sunflowers and black children with golden halos. And then, just as things began to feel victorious, Crenshaw made one final move. He filed a legal complaint to force them off the property, citing zoning violations. He claimed their space wasn't up to code and posed a safety risk. He petitioned the city to revoke their occupancy permit. The battle moved from the streets to the courtroom. But Maya and Dante didn't run. They organized. They filed counterclaims, hired a pro bono legal team made up of young attorneys who had once been studio volunteers. They turned every legal meeting into a community teach-in. And when the city council scheduled a hearing, the people showed up. Teachers, artists, plumbers, single moms, veterans, teenagers. Everyone who had ever touched the studio stood in line for hours to speak, testifying not just about zoning, but about how the studio had healed them, how it had replaced fear with color, how it had turned strangers into neighbors. And then came the final moment. Maya walked to the microphone, eyes clear. "Every inch of this studio was built with love. It may not be perfect on paper, but it's perfect for people. And if that's not enough to keep it open, then maybe we're measuring the wrong things." The room erupted in applause. Some battles aren't won with fists or lawyers, they're won by refusing to leave, by staying when you're told to disappear, by loving something so deeply that not even fear can push you away. That's what Maya and Dante did. They didn't just survive the storm, they stood still in it, hands open, inviting others to stand with them. And in doing so, they became something more than founders of a studio. They became symbols. The city hearing lasted hours. Crenshaw's team argued zoning, safety, legality. But what they couldn't argue with were the stories. One by one, people walked to the podium and told the council how Williams and Carter Studio had repaired more than just leaky sinks or flickering lights. It had repaired them, their trust, their dignity, their sense of belonging. A young boy shared how he used to get suspended every month until he learned how to paint. A woman explained how the studio taught her how to fix her heater without waiting for her landlord. An older man choked up talking about the time Maya sat with him for hours after his wife died just listening. When it was over, the council took a vote. 6-1. Permit granted. Studio saved. Maya squeezed Dante's hand, and for the first time in front of everyone, he smiled fully. Not the polite kind, not the guarded one, but a smile that said, "We're still here." Let's pause and breathe that in. Because too often stories like these end in erasure. The black man goes back to invisibility. The woman is labeled emotional. The community loses another safe space. But not this time. Because they refused to play the game by its old rules. They didn't ask for permission to exist, they proved why they had to. The next morning, the studio opened early. A line had already formed outside. Not for services, for celebration. Maya and Dante repainted the mural that had been vandalized during the smear campaign. They invited the kids to help. Little hands dipped in paint. Colors smeared across concrete like resistance. Above the doorway, they added new words in gold. "We fix what others leave broken." And in that moment, the studio wasn't just a building. It was a declaration. Maya never returned to corporate life. She didn't need to. She found something more meaningful. something that paid her in thank you notes, laughter, and freedom. She wrote a book called Quiet Revolution: Why I Left the Boardroom to Build a Bench, which became a bestseller not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. Dante kept working with his hands, fixing broken lamps, patching walls, teaching kids how to build furniture. He became a neighborhood uncle, a mentor, a symbol of quiet strength. Every once in a while, someone would ask him why he never started his own big business, and he'd just smile and say, "Because I already did." Their story spread. Documentaries were made. Schools visited the studio for field trips. Other neighborhoods copied the model. But Maya and Dante never let the fame distract them, because their mission was never about attention. It was about restoration. Now let's zoom out and ask, why did this story matter? Because it shattered stereotypes. It reminded us that not all heroes wear suits, that janitors are often poets, that CEOs can become caretakers, that love, yes, love even the kind built from deep respect and shared purpose, isn't always romantic, but it is always radical when built across lines of race, class, and power. And it reminded us that visibility, while powerful, must be protected, especially for those whom the system prefers to keep quiet. So here's your takeaway. Listen to the quiet people, the ones pushing carts at midnight, the ones sitting silently after everyone else has gone home, the ones who don't speak unless they have something worth saying. They are not invisible. They are waiting for someone brave enough to see them. And if you are one of those quiet people, don't let the world convince you that your silence is weakness. It may be your superpower. Because one day someone will sit next to you, and for the first time you'll be able to say exactly what Dante said when Maya first saw him: performance pays more, but truth lasts longer.